Hello, my name is Lauren Curry, and today I'll be discussing the school to prison pipeline and the criminalization of youth for our EDU 6050 course. We'll begin with an overview of the school to prison pipeline, then dive into the history and the problem, before moving into the impact on education, my own analysis, and possible solution of restorative practices. The school to prison pipeline refers to the path from the education system to the juvenile or adult criminal justice system. Over the past 30 years, the pipeline has grown significantly, with marginalized youth in particular facing a disproportionate level of punishment. The overpolicing of schools and disparities among underprivileged student populations is depriving youth an opportunity to effective education and is creating school atmospheres that resemble prisons as opposed to learning environments. The school to prison pipeline is a significant issue in our education system and one that needs immediate attention. A brief history of the pipeline's development will demonstrate the escalation of school discipline referrals over the past 30 years. The tough-on-crime policies of the 1980s spread the false message that more youth were dangerous and required stricter sentencing in juvenile court. In the 1990s, the Guns Free Schools Act was passed, which moved the creation of zero-tolerance policies, which we will discuss later in the presentation. The 1999 Columbine shootings reinforced the security in schools movement. Coupled with the decrease in school funding and a focus on test scores in the 2001 No Child Left Behind Act, schools no longer have the time or resources to focus on supporting youth through disciplinary challenges. The history is evident through the statistics below. In 1993, 1.5 million students were suspended, while in the 2011-2012 school year, 3.5 million students received in-school suspension, while 3.45 million students received out-of-school suspension. Connected to history, there are a number of factors that contributed to the construction of the school-to-prison pipeline. In this section, I focus on 4 factors that I find to be particularly important. During this segment, I will focus in on zero-tolerance policies, educator bias, education funding issues, and prison-like schools. Zero-tolerance policies are utilized to determine consequences that are often punitive without considering the severity or context of an action. The policy fails to recognize the situation at hand or provide space to listen to the student's reasoning for an action or behavior. Students disciplined through these policies are often first-time offenders for nonviolent incidents. Zero-tolerance policies are also inequitable, as Black students are more likely to receive more punitive responses to their actions as opposed to rehabilitative than their white peers. The next factor is educator bias. With the teacher population being overwhelmingly white and many white educators supporting populations of youth of color, this gap in lived experience and often social justice education can have huge implications for how students of color are disciplined. Reports from North Carolina confirm that same-race teachers impact the rate that students receive detention, are suspended, or expelled. Holding a place of power, teachers also are able to define what is and what is not racism in the classroom, often missing or enacting the microaggressions that students of color are impacted by day in and day out. The implicit bias of educators results in more students of color facing punitive action. The next factor is education funding issues. The public education system has left many schools under-resourced and teachers and staff overworked. A 2007 study states that the U.S. has seen a 127% funding increase in incarceration over a 30-year period, compared to only a 21% increase in funding for higher education. Schools do not have the capacity to provide the intervention support that some young people require. This in turn has led many teachers to react to difficult students with office referrals. That trend towards funding more prisons than schools also adds to the cultural message that schools are not a place to learn, but a place to be punished or told how to behave. The final factor we'll look at is prison-like schools. Schools have begun to look more and more like prisons. Because of the public attention of school shootings, a misconception that schools are a dangerous place has perpetuated in our media and country. This is happening, although crime statistics demonstrate that schools are actually the safest place in the U.S. The narrative is why schools have seen an increase in metal detectors, random searches, and school resource officers, or school police officers, in the last 2 decades. These school resource officers see school discipline from a law enforcement perspective as opposed to a youth development perspective. These factors have a huge impact on education, creating a major barrier to effective education in schools. Students that misbehave, even in minor ways, are facing grave consequences, including run-ins with law enforcement. Taking students out of the classroom impacts the learning process and tells young people that the learning environment is not for them. Taking a deeper look at the pathway to prison, Monahan et al. States it only takes one suspension to dramatically increase a student's likelihood to drop out or end up in the criminal justice system. The diagram represents a potential pathway that may lead to a student to prison. A student being suspended, falling behind in school, dropping out, then getting tangled in the juvenile justice system, and eventually ending up in prison is not an uncommon story and is a trend we as educators need to work to put an end to. Considering my own positionality and analysis, factors that have contributed to the school-to-prison pipeline have been normalized, primarily due to the lack of ulterior methods to addressing discipline in schools beyond exclusionary and reactive policies. The issue is further perpetuated in schools that support low-income youth, youth with disabilities, students of color, and immigrant students. A lack of resources for communities that are mainly composed of marginalized youth creates the perfect storm. Exclusionary discipline policies are seen as a quick and necessary solution because teachers often don't have the time, resources, training, or cultural competency needed to address the complexities that often surround student behavior. Taking a closer examination of demographic trends, the parallel between the rate of out-of-school suspensions and the rate of incarceration are telling. Black students are almost 4 times more likely to receive out-of-school suspension than their white peers, while individuals that are black are incarcerated at a rate 5.1 times more than that of those that are white. Taking on a holistic approach, the frightening demographic trends, coupled with the factors that have built the school-to-prison pipeline, demonstrate that there is a need for this holistic approach to supporting young people. As a youth worker in the out-of-school time field, I have witnessed the critical role that multiple caring adults can have in a young person's life, and how a strong web of support can turn a student who is failing to a college-bound senior. As a society, we need to recognize the value of developing these spaces for youth and encouraging academic and social engagement in all aspects of life, not just in school. It has taken years to construct the school-to-prison pipeline, so it will take years to dismantle. However, school systems, activists, and communities are coming together to resist over-policing in schools and implement practices that actually encourage student success and positive behavior. One such strategy that is proving to be effective is restorative practices. Restorative practices are a student-focused intervention strategy that relies on including the affected parties of an infraction and developing a collective response for resolution and repair. It incorporates the power of healing and a collaborative approach to support including teachers and the school community in addressing behavior issues and working through them together. To further demonstrate the effectiveness of integrating restorative practice, we'll examine 2 peer-reviewed studies from various high schools in the United States. Gregory, Clausen, Davis, and Gurewitz examined if greater implementation of restorative practices would result in higher student-reported teacher respect and result in teachers issuing fewer disciplinary actions to students. Teachers were trained on restorative practices, and after implementation, both teachers and students were surveyed. The results demonstrated that higher implementation of restorative practices was associated with higher level of students reporting respect of their teachers and lower levels of misconduct or defiance referrals. Anion et al. Analyzed restorative interventions integrated into the Denver Public School District and hoped to determine if implementation of restorative practices in the first semester would result in lower office referrals and suspension in the second semester. Utilizing the data of 9,921 students that have received discipline referrals in the 2012-2013 year, the researchers were able to demonstrate that the students had lower odds of repeating disciplinary behavior in the second semester. The study was important because it also represents a district-wide commitment to decreasing exclusionary discipline practices. For both studies, we must remain cautious of external confounds and causational correlations. However, These initial studies are important indicators of the potential of restorative justice practices. The school-to-prison pipeline is an issue in education that has impacted me both personally and professionally. There's promising work being done to address the issue, but we must acknowledge the work we still have to do. I appreciate you taking the time to view my presentation and encourage you to reach out to me with any questions. Thank you.